Good afternoon and welcome. I'm really glad to have you with us today. I think this show, while it might not be about pure medical matters, could be so important for developing your practice, and maybe as a result it's going to help us promote the professions as a whole. Now, the idea for the show came about as a result of numerous members asking us how they could invest in their businesses, their practices. People who are facing that horrible obstacle that in order to grow you need to spend money, but in order to spend that money you've got to have grown as well. You've got to have the spare cash. Well, over the last 10 years or so, we've had the same dilemma, both in my own clinic and here at the Academy, but we found a way around it. Now, I would love to take the credit myself, but actually it's my wife, Claire, also an osteopath, of course, who was the driving force behind all this. She's really, really good at the sort of research that was necessary to get us access to this. It was Claire who found out about that change in the healthcare regulations regarding COVID that I emailed you about yesterday, and it was Claire who found out about the array of grants which were available to us, all under the heading of business innovation or something similar to that. What she's not good at, and she won't mind me saying it because let's face it, who is filling in forms. But she did discover Gordon Brady. And Gordon's my guest today. He's the Senior Business Partnership Manager at Bedford University, and he showed us which forms we needed to fill in. He got us to draft the justification for the money, and then he tweaked everything so that it satisfied the boards that awarded the cash, and award it they did. In fact, Gordon, I think you said you have something like a 95% success record in getting people grants. Is that correct?
Luckily, yes. When we first started talking to you, it was 98%, and then somebody put in a grant application without any advice or support, and that one failed.
Yeah. Well, at the time you told me that the ones you didn't have success with were the ones where the businesses themselves had not done what you told them to do. So that's can't be held against you, really.
Invariably, people put in a grant and say, I just want to give the money to my friend if I can, rather than three general quotes that are realistic.
Right, I've got a couple of questions to start with, because of course you're in my local area. You're the Business Partnership Manager at Bedford University. People might be wondering what the hell one of those is for and what it does, but also wondering whether they're going to find one at a university or an organisation local to them. So,
fair question. So universities do three things. They do research, because if we're just teaching, the AA School of Motoring is just teaching. So what are we teaching? We're teaching the latest discoveries, the latest inventions, the latest advances in whichever field it happens to be. So that comes about through our research, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. We do teaching, we do research. How do we get that value out into the wider world? We do this third thing called knowledge exchange. It's a very insular university type word, but knowledge exchange applies to every university in Britain. They will all have someone who deals with knowledge exchange. And the idea of that is, how do we get the academic knowledge out to the wider public benefit? And very often that means if we've invented something in particular, that's great. We won't have the service ways to do that. We won't have the customer service operations, the engineers, all of that sort of stuff. So that's why we work with the outside world.
It all sounds quite, from what you've said, it all sounds quite academic, whereas the people watching this show are going to be thinking, well, actually what I want to do is I want to grow my business as a physiotherapist, osteopath, chiropractor. So why are people going to give us money? What's the purpose of the grants?
Universities aren't going to give you money, but we are going to help you find out where that money is. People like government have to give you money because the government needs to grow the economy. Opening another restaurant next to 15 other restaurants is not going to grow the economy, it's going to dilute the economy. Mm-hmm. But opening the only Korean barbecue in a place that is full of Chinese takeaways, that's something a bit different. They're looking for some way, some new offer. Maybe you're the company that's invented the flying car made of cheese. Yeah. So government has to give out money to grow the economy, because you're not going to do it yourself. We want to invest 2.4% of GDP in research and development. There's lots of funding for that. There are four main areas that they want to do that in. Data and AI, obviously everybody's heard of all the data and AI work that's going on at the moment. Healthy aging, we're an aging population. So the government has to make sure we do that in such a way as we're not an increasing burden on the NHS. Future transport, because we all need to go places and the car as was is no longer the way forward. And everything to do with sustainability, carbon capture and the environment. And any mix of those four things, there's going to be funding for the next 10 years in advances in those things or better uses of those things.
You did kind of set my expectations a bit low before we started this, because you said that when I applied for the grants that we got, there was a lot of European Union funding still available, despite the fact we'd already left,
Yes.
because it was still hanging on. How much of that's disappeared? How much is now available?
Well, EU funding as was, it came in 7-year tranches. So effectively we were committed to that budget between 2014 and 2021. So it didn't matter that we left in 2016, the budget was done, set, spent,
Yeah.
committed. So we were just effectively getting back the money that we'd put in. Happens for years. That funding dried up, programs stopped launching in 2020. So they finish this year, and they are finishing at a rapid rate of knots all across the country.
Right.
There has to be replacements. Those replacements are just starting in 2023. Probably 24, they're going to take off more widely. But that doesn't mean there's no funding available now. There's still
Right.
quite a lot out there, but probably not as
So
much
the sort
as there once
of,
was.
and we'll get on to the detail of these shortly, the sort of things that I got money for, which is, a lot of it's pointing at you and me right now in this studio.
Yep.
That sort of money might well become available again in the future.
Definitely will.
When will the bidding process start? Will that be a year down from the line from now, or?
There is still money available right now
Yeah.
for business support.
Yes.
Usually from local enterprise partnerships or from local authorities.
Yeah.
Increasingly, more of that money will go through local authorities through something called Strengthening Places funding, which they're kind of allocating now.
Strength in places.
Strengthening Places
Strengthening
funding,
places, right.
which the local authorities will be allocating now and working out how they're going to do this and who's going to do what the form look like, that sort of stuff. I suspect those will start launching end of this year, certainly March next year.
Okay.
But there is still things available now.
Okay, so in which case there are sort of three sort of aspects to bidding that people might be interested in. What they can get now, where they might be able to go with Strengthening Places, and what they might get from the replacement for all those EU grants subsequently.
Yeah, there's those things. There's lots of other things available as well. There's grants for staff development and there's grants for all sorts of other bits.
And exactly, and that's one of the things I want to talk about, because I think one of the grants we got was for a member of staff to do marketing for us in this business at one point. Lovely lady who sadly had more intention of being a professional golfer and went off and left us to do professional golf because she was too damn good at that. But she, it was great to have somebody fund a member of staff to come in and do that for us at the time, because it was something we couldn't do.
Okay.
There were limitations on that, which perhaps I needn't go into now, but perhaps you can tell us what we might get for staff development and staff placements and so on.
Let's take marketing as an example, because it's something I regularly get asked for help with. So if a business approaches us and says, I want help with marketing, well, for our university, for instance, Bedfordshire, very small, very good looking university, but one of the things we might do is link you directly to one of our academics who is teaching and researching in marketing.
Yeah.
And we'll fund that academic to work with the company for maybe 2 or 3 days of their time spread out over a month or 2 months.
Yeah.
Because the company might just need that guidance.
And we had that, yes.
Maybe we'll say, you need a student, and we'll help fund a contract to take a student or a graduate for a month or so to do something like that. Another university, I don't want to mention their name, let's call them first name of North and the end name Hamptonshire. We'll protect their identity, but they've got a program called Driven. Effectively, you have somebody for 400 hours, they will fund £1,000 of that person's wages. 400 hours over any period of time, 3 months, 6 months, that sort of thing. So you've got someone who's going to come in and do your marketing effectively without it being a big cash burden. It might be that you work with your local LEP and they have particular workshops directly aimed at sorting out your marketing problems. These are all things that are live right now, and they're probably live everywhere across the country.
Right, okay. That obviously implies, it tells us that there will be some sort of personal contribution or business contribution to that funding. £1,000 for 400 hours is not going to cover everything, is it?
So that's the Driven programme from Northamptonshire.
Yeah.
For instance, if you're working with the academics from the University of Bedfordshire, no, there's not that contribution. If you're working with one of the LEP or local authority workshop programmes, there's probably no contribution. But you could be thinking, maybe I'll put one of my staff through a level 4 digital apprenticeship in marketing. Now, digital apprenticeship in marketing, probably something like £8,000 or £9,000 a year, maybe. Actually, marketing I think is about 6,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
But 95% of that is funded. So long as you're a limited company, so long as you're not a sole trader, 95% of that is funded by government. So now you're finding 5% of the salary of somebody. 5% of the apprenticeship cost, well, £300 for a year, next to no cost. Maybe you're putting them through, a level 4 is equivalent to the first year of a degree.
Yeah.
Maybe you're putting them through a full marketing degree apprenticeship. So that's a 3-year and a bit, because you're trying to retain that member of staff. You don't want them leaving and going off and playing golf.
Yeah.
So if you want them for that 3 years, that's probably going to keep them for the 3 years on a full degree apprenticeship. So at the end of it, they get a degree out of it, as well as their apprenticeship. It's cost you £300 a year.
Right.
It's such an easy way of retaining and upskilling staff, rather than saying, I'm only going to keep them if I pay them an extra £5,000.
How might it apply? Let's say I run a practice and I've got 5 chiropractors, 5 osteopaths and 5 physiotherapists on my team. How would it apply if I said, one of them wants to do an MSc in sports therapy? Would we be able to apply for funding for that sort of thing?
So an MSc, a taught master's programme, probably not a lot of funding around for that at the moment.
Okay.
But if you want to do a research programme, a master's by research, so this is not sitting and being taught something in particular, it's I've already got my degree, now I want to do some research in that subject. Almost all universities will have 50% funding for either a master's or a full PhD in research. If you wanted to take on someone to do a PhD, most universities will take them on under a stipend scheme. So that would cost you, if it's 50% funded, that's probably going to cost the company about £11,000 a year. The person doing the PhD receives a stipend, a salary of just over 18,000.
Mm-hmm.
So already they're getting more salary than you're paying, and their fees are included, as well as the academics that are supervising them, guiding the research, all that sort of stuff. And you own the IP. That's the key thing out of it.
Right.
Because whatever you invent, whatever you discover, you don't want to say, oh, I've discovered that, other people get that for free.
So putting this into context for the people who are watching this, I mean, one of the perennial complaints about osteopathy and chiropractic is that there's limited research to justify what we do, and there's limited research because nobody's funding the stuff, because we don't sell drugs the way Big Pharma does, so we can't do that sort of thing. Here's an opportunity to remedy that defect, to improve the profile of both those professions, and also upskill some people within the practices, perhaps, if they wanted to do that.
I think at that point you're probably looking at, yes, you can do co-funded PhDs and things like that with your local university, but there's probably also funding available through people like UKRI.
Yes.
If you just think carefully about what are the aims of one of these government departments, one of these research organisations, and what are your aims, and can you tie the two together? Going back to what I said about healthy ageing.
Yes.
If there's some funding around in healthy ageing and you're thinking, how
so
can I
you
tie
mentioned
these together?
UKRI. Let's talk me through what UKRI is.
I could really do with a screenshot of something here. Ta-da! Before we come to UKRI, I'm going to come back to the very first bit, which is, because we moved slightly away into research, let's stick with the kind of innovation, the I want to grow my business, as you've done here.
Yeah.
I want to take my business in a slightly different direction, develop a new product, process, service, something like that.
And just before you go on, I do need to say to you that if you are worried about not knowing where to find these forms, I will send them all out as links later on. So all of these web addresses and so on, and the detail of what we discuss will come out later on. So don't worry about not being able to track them down straight away. Sorry, Gordon.
Not a problem. If we pop back to the other screen that we just had, the black one. So this is Innovate UK. We'll send you this around. This is a fairly general how to get grants, this is one of their long-running grant programs.
Yep.
So this one is, I want to invent a new thing. I want to create a new product, a new process, a new service, for example. So they're called smart grants. Because they're so wide open, this will be one of the most competitive. You'll have lots of people applying for this sort of program. So it's not necessarily the first place to start, but it's a useful one for us to use as an example. So if we look at this and we scroll down the bottom of this description here,
Which we will do any
the
second.
screen moves as if by magic, and we're stopping at project size. This to fund projects that you might want to do for, let's say it's a year's project, to develop a new widget, a new service that you want to offer. You don't know quite how to do it. It's a bit uncertain. So that's going to cost £100,000.
Well, this is scary though. People are going to say, well, this only affects projects for between £100,000 and £500,000. That's a lot of money. I don't think I can do a project that expensive.
Absolutely, but I'm using this one as an example of the way that these things fund, because the rates of what they call the intervention rate, which is how much of that 100 grand can you get from the government, those are fairly standard rates across all programmes.
Right.
So it's worth knowing, if you were looking at a £100,000 project, how much funding can you get? And if we go back to the next tab, the eligibility tab, clicking like that, and then we scroll right the way down, the key word we're looking for is funding. Funnily enough, and then you can see here, if you're looking at a funding project for £100,000 and you're a small organisation, so you've got less than 10 staff, 70% funding.
Yeah.
Now that's for that £100,000 level project. If you're doing a much bigger project, then the rates are different, but you're probably not talking about over £1 million for most of them.
What's included in that amount though? Because as I say, I mean, for most of the people watching, the idea of coughing up 30 grand in order to do a project is quite a lot.
Yes.
Does that include personnel staff costs?
Yes. So it's
actually it's covering salaries as well?
Yeah, it's the project costs rather than
Yeah.
I'm buying in that thing from that person. So you would say, if you're Airbus and you're inventing a new wing, you're going to need a designer. You're going to need someone external who's going to produce one out of balsa wood. So there'll be contractors that you're buying in, there'll be materials, there'll be your own staff, there'll be research time. Maybe you need to work with a university.
Yeah.
They can be part of it. They'll apply for bits of it themselves. And if you're doing a bid like that, usually having a university on board is quite helpful because they'll know how these things work, and they will help you write a better bid.
But one of the key things you said there was your own staff. So some of that money could be for people that you're going to pay anyway.
That's always the point.
Yeah.
Most of the UK, most organisations are always busy doing some form of development. Mm-hmm. We just don't think we are. We tend to think that's business as usual. Get the funding for it. It just eases your cash flow that little bit.
Yeah. A couple of questions have come in here. Marion has said she hopes I'm okay because apparently I have a James Bond voice today, and you're absolutely right, Marion. I do have a bit of a James Bond voice. I don't have COVID, but Claire's update on the guidelines for COVID was very timely a couple of days ago because it does mean I've got a better perspective on whether I can go back into clinic or not, or when I can. Somebody who's anonymous says any funding for sole practitioners because his chiropractic table needs replacing. Now, nobody's going to give you money just to replace a table that's worn out, but how do we find something that will help in this regard? Can we?
So this is a challenge. Sole practitioners, it becomes difficult because the people giving out the money, they have to give out the money. So it's a mental approach to not be thinking, I'm going there with a begging bowl. You're helping them. If you fill out the right forms, they have to give you the money. Think of it that way. But if they're working with a sole practitioner, that person, because there's not a separate legal entity that says that's the money for the business, and that's the money that's in my bank account for going on holiday with, it's very hard for someone to audit that and say we gave the money to that thing and not that thing. So they tend to stay well away from sole
We could possibly
practitioners.
talk about the pros and cons of being a limited company, because actually it's not difficult to become a limited company. It's not expensive to become a limited company. You do have to jump through the hoops of having, your very concise accounts published every year. But
it's about £100
yeah,
to be a limited company.
It's small, isn't it?
It is relatively small. The benefits are you can access more funding. You can also access things like R&D tax credits and other forms of tax credit, and things like COVID grants that came out were much easier to apply for as a limited company than as a sole individual.
Yeah. So perhaps a lesson is it's worth thinking about whether being a limited company is useful to you and
Yes.
would save you money in the long term.
But to answer the core question, they will never fund business as usual, because the aim is grow.
Yes.
If it's, I had this,
Could you?
and I
Well,
could
okay
do
then.
10.
So if you said, actually, I'm going to have another chiropractor, I need another table.
Now, yes.
Now are we looking at something?
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
eligible?
There are usually, certainly in this area, there has been a business growth fund that said, you're going to need a second table. Oh, that means you're going to need a second member of staff. Well, effectively, you've created a job. Here's £5,000. Done.
Yeah.
And it was as simple as that.
And I probably shouldn't say this, and I certainly won't tell anybody who told me this.
Nobody's listening.
But I do remember hearing from my anonymous source that once you've bought your equipment, nobody actually checks to see whether you've actually kept it or whether you've flogged it on eBay afterwards. No, nobody would have told me that. Obviously.
Nobody would have told you that. Yeah, I mean, obviously you're supposed to keep the equipment and use the equipment and so on and so forth.
My point is not that this is a way to sell stuff on and make
Yeah.
profit. The point is that, put your case together. If it's accepted, it's accepted, and actually you can then get on with business and not worry about it.
And if you write that capital equipment off over 3 years, at the end of 3 years, what you do with that equipment is entirely up to you. It's gone.
Yeah. I need to digress for a second. Sarah, you asked what the changes to the COVID guidance were. I pushed this out in an email yesterday. It's a month old nearly, but the government updated its guidance to say that you no longer have to test, and you don't have to do a lateral flow test if you've got symptoms like mine. You don't have to test twice negative to go back into clinic. Essentially, it's the same as any other respiratory disease. You wait until your temperature is normal, if it was ever different, and you wait until you feel healthy again, and then you can go back into clinic. That was all it was. And look back for my email yesterday, because the details were in there, including a link to the government document. So sorry if you didn't get that email. Where are we going on this? Right, there was an interesting one that came up a moment ago. Well, Jane says it would be really helpful if there was a list somewhere of what's available. It's not quite that simple, is it?
It's never that simple.
It's amazing how difficult the government can make it to find things.
A, that's a little bit true, but B, that's like asking for a list of all the people who live in, all the people who are in the town centre. That list changed from the moment I started that sentence to the moment I finished that sentence. Funding is always changing because the need in the world is changing. Yeah. It is as straightforward as that.
In addition to what you just showed us, 3 primary sources to look for things that are available.
I have a team of 4 people who are literally paid every day to find these forms of funding, and they can't keep up.
Yeah,
you will never have a list. It's one of the things that people always wish for, but it's technically impossible. Yeah. It just is. Right. And hence why you talk to people like you, or you talk to people like me, or you talk to your local authority, or you talk to your local enterprise partnership, and you find, frankly, people who are going to go and bird dog for you, do that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get on to the other 2 sites that you were going to mention, but there's a couple of questions here which are really worth looking at now. First one from Alpa says, what help can we get to reduce our carbon footprint? And that sounds like it would be really popular.
As we said, one of the 4 big things at the moment. So one of the things right now is a program called Low Carbon Workspaces, Low Carbon Workspace Grant. And that is pretty much, I need to install solar panels in my workspace, I need to insulate, I need to put some EV charging points, I need more efficient computers that are going to generate less heat. Any of that sort of stuff. Low carbon workspaces are grants of 50% up to about £5,000. So, and they're very, very easy to get. They apply to most of the country.
Can you apply for more than one? If you say I want to replace my computers and I want to put in EV charging points and so on?
Through the Low Carbon Workspaces grant, you would only get 1 grant, right, he says. But you would pick which one of those is the most relevant, and then you would look to see which other grants are available that will offset some other things. Invariably, government departments and various people, they will slice and dice all of their grants into small little different pots and different titles and so on and so forth, but they'll fall into those 4 big categories. Low carbon is one of them. There'll be grants around low carbon for particular things for the next 10 years.
Which is quite interesting, because I asked you before we came on air, can I still get money to replace my computers? And you said no. But now if I say I'm getting better computers which are more carbon efficient, then maybe the answer is possibly.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
So there was a program called Help to Grow Digital, which was literally there to help people access software, half a billion pounds. The aim was to help 100,000 businesses be more productive. And you'd be amazed at how unproductive UK businesses really are. We still think, send an email to sales at, and that works. It just doesn't. But people think it does. So they put out a grant without training people as to what the grant would help them achieve. And so out of the 100,000 businesses that were planned to have a grant of £5,000 each, they received 1,000 applications. So that grant's gone, but that money will go somewhere else and it will be used for something else.
Yeah.
And it will be some sort of business support.
And this is, so it almost took my breath away when we first came to you, because you were basically saying, look, sit down, I want to hand this money over. We've got to hand this money over, because if you don't, you're going to lose it. It's going to go somewhere else, or the whole thing will be scrapped.
Yes.
You know, it was hard not to take money from you at the time. It's a little bit more difficult now, I appreciate, but the money is still there.
Yeah, it is right now, but it's a bit more convoluted and it's a bit scarcer, but only for a while.
Right, let me just have a quick look at another couple of questions before we move on to now this one's relevant to one of your slides. Yekaterina says, any projects available under the NHS, maybe to get referrals or contracts? Might be off topic, and it's not off topic at all.
It's absolutely not.
Should we go to that one first?
Well, happy to do that.
So let's go to our third. Thank you, Justin.
As if by magic.
As if by magic, we have the government contracts finder.
Can I talk you through this page?
Yeah.
And I want to talk you through two things. First, so every large organisation, every public sector organisation, NHS, all of those sorts of things, if they're putting out contracts of more than about £25,000, they have to put them on here. Universities, local authorities, everyone, they have to put them on here. This isn't grants or anything like that. This is just, we're looking for someone who can supply this sort of service. And we'll have a look and see if there's anything relevant there in a moment. So these are people who are going to give you money. And people who are going to give you money are your customers. They are not necessarily the same as your clients. And this is a big thing for small businesses to really understand. The example I always use is a child's nursery. So if I take my little girl and we head off to a child's nursery, one of us is going to use the services and one of us is going to pay for the services in theory. So one of us is the client and one of us is the customer. The client is certainly my daughter. People often think that I'm the customer, but actually I'm using 30 hours of government funded places. I'm also the client. The customer is the government.
Because they're coughing up the cash.
They're coughing up the cash.
Yeah.
The customer is who, we have a reason for saying the customer is king. You've got to think about not just your service for the person using the service, but your service to the customer. And is that efficient? Is that slick? Is that quick? Is it easy for them to give you money? If they have to click through 4 things on your website before they can give you money, it's probably not that easy. So it's worth thinking about that. So we talked about grants and so on earlier on, but we wanted to look at Contracts Finder. These are customers waiving money, saying, please let me give you some money. So up to a certain value, there we are, £138,000. Up to that value, it will appear on here. Contracts over 138,000, they will appear on Find a Tender service. Luckily, click the link and that will take you straight there. But we'll just stick with the Contracts Finder for a moment. And if we click the Start Now button, it is as simple as, shall we have a look for physiotherapy?
Let's look for physiotherapy.
Physiotherapy, there we are. Look at that.
You'd always think we rehearsed this, wouldn't you?
You'd think we rehearsed it once before.
Now, before anybody complains, we're looking for physiotherapy because perhaps osteopathy or chiropractic is a little bit too specific, but you can put in whatever search terms you like. But let's see what comes up with this. Noted
on the left that these are opportunities. They're things that we've done in the past or things that might be upcoming. You can choose to look at those. You probably want to know what happened in the past, because if the Denbighshire government local authority issued a contract for XYZ, chances are that the government or the local authority in Cornwall is going to do the same thing at some point, and the one in Northamptonshire and the one elsewhere. So it's worth looking at the past. Here we go. Request for quotation for physiotherapy services, provision of rapid access physiotherapists. What have we got? 4 here?
I don't know. What have we got down? Oh, hang on. Stop that. What's that one there?
Corporate cash health plan. So this is not the provision of services, but it sort of is. So Runnymede Council want to set up a cash plan for their staff to put in a bit of cash, and the council will put in a bit of cash, which they can then use to purchase services such as chiropody, osteopathy, hospital
Osteopathy,
stays.
yeah, and it doesn't say chiropractic, but there might be some others specified. Contract value between 80 and 90k.
Yeah. These are very straightforward. You don't need to go to a university for any of these. You don't need our help for any of these. You can just bid for money.
Yeah, so hopefully that's, your Katerina is going to be interested in this sort of thing. And you can try different search terms and see what comes up, can't you?
Yes.
But also there'll be lots of other people who might be thinking, well, actually, this sort of thing is going to get your business known apart from anything else, because more and more people will hear about it in business, but also all these people telling their mates and friends. And
it also takes you, because people are often saying, where is this? How does that company tender for services? How does that company tender for services? They all use a million different procurement services.
Yeah.
This website is the central place to go to find all of that sort of stuff.
And that, we didn't come to that by accident. We spent 5 minutes before we went on air and came to that osteopathy mention there. So, with a bit more effort, we'd probably find lots and lots of opportunities. Even if it doesn't specify osteopathy or chiropractic, I would still be inclined to have a look at it and see whether, the contract is wide enough to accept other therapies.
Far be it from me to say that in January, February and March, lots of organisations have budget to use up, and if they don't use it up, they will lose that budget, and so an awful lot more contracts might appear for fulfilment in January, February and March. I would definitely not mention that.
Right. A bit late now, isn't it? We'll have to come and mention it again
Yes.
in 9 months' time.
Yeah.
Okay. Anthony's, and this is, again, there's so many really nice questions coming in. Anthony wants to know, how about funding a falls clinic? We talked about healthy ageing. Falls is important.
Now,
Does it have to be innovative in some way?
well, let's have a think about that. So you're going to provide a new service. If there's not a falls clinic around, you're providing a new service.
Well, there might be one 15, 20 miles away.
If there's not one in your local authority area, that's
Right.
new.
Okay.
So that's some innovation. It might be that you're providing that service in a slightly different way. So it might be that you use that smart grant type funding or something similar. It might be that you're providing a specific service to a specific group of people. Maybe your falls service is for people with MS. So maybe you get a little grant from the MS Society. Maybe it's for people from a certain ethnic background who don't know how to access particular healthcare services. In which case, have you thought about lottery funding? Lottery funding up to £10,000 is fairly straightforward. It's really quite easy to get.
Right.
Maybe it's something that is of community benefit. And I'm going to take Luton as an example. We've got an airport, and the airport is actually owned by the local authority, which means some of the money generated by the airport goes into local grant-making organisations. Again, if you don't want to work with a university or go through you, it's one of those words to look up, grant-making organisations. Luton Airport's money goes into something called the Bedfordshire and Luton Community Foundation, which is anything to help the community in Luton and Bedfordshire. A falls clinic is going to help the community in Luton and Bedfordshire.
Yeah.
There you go. So you could get funding for that. Maybe you want to, we might use the UKRI website for this. Maybe you want to, we already know what a falls clinic can do, but I want to extend the service in some way. I want to wrap around another service or see if there's a way that it particularly affects left-handed people or right-handed people. There's a research project to do here.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't just do a co-funded Masters by Research, but if we look at something like the UKRI website, so UKRI is UK Research and Innovation. There are 8 or 9 different research councils. One is to do with research on health, one is research about the economy, one is research in social care, one is research on the physical environment, all sorts of things like that. So they're broken down on the left-hand side, but fundamentally all of the things that they want to do research on are on this one UKRI Innovate UK page. Again, we'll send out the link. These will change every day. The Innovate UK ones will probably change every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. These will change every day, and there will always be dozens of them. So if we looked at the sectors that are involved here, we can do a quick search for health, mental health challenges. So we want to do some research in mental health. If we scroll down a little bit, see what we've got here. Occupational health, increasing access to, now Stephen, far be it from me to mention, access and capacity in occupational health. If only there was some way of delivering occupational health remotely through some sort of camera system.
Yes. Yeah.
This is the sort of thing that you could use your existing capacity and capability and say, well, how else could I do this?
Betty closes on the 15th of March.
There'll be others. There's always others. And again,
Why are
today
they
is
still
the-
showing? If a lot of these are closed
I think
already.
we may have chosen a particular
Oh, right, okay.
sort order to look at
Yeah.
things in one way or t'other. Artificial intelligence in health and care awards. Maybe you've got a falls clinic. Well, maybe you don't have a falls clinic, but you'd like to do some research in whether artificial intelligence could improve the rate of recovery or prevention of falls. So
Yeah.
I'm going to need some funding to build a falls clinic with AI involved.
Let me just read that. A total of £140 million in funding over 3 years to support the use of AI in NHS health and care. So NHS health and care, I'm just assuming that might mean two different aspects of care, and different phases depending on technology readiness level, whatever the hell that means. So,
Technology readiness levels are quite simple. It's a phrase used by NASA.
right.
10 of them. Level 10 is we have invented the pen. We use the pen is here. We know how a pen works and everything else. Level 0, I wonder if there's some way of capturing my thoughts permanently. I haven't invented the pen yet. I've got no idea. I've got to go and find out what a pen might be. And then it's, have you got a concept? Have you tested it in a lab? Have you tested it out in the wider world? Can you manufacture it? Etc., etc. Those are the kind of 10 levels, TRL levels,
Right.
all exciting.
I've just realised how close we are to running out of time. We've still got 9 minutes left, but we haven't touched on your third resource that we were going to put up, have we? Let me just quickly touch on a couple of the questions that have come in. Daniela says, does a sole practitioner have less chance of getting funding? We've already addressed that, Daniela, and yes, but then why be a sole practitioner might be a question you'd want to address. Salome Olivia says, are there any other sources of funding like the WHO, UN, UNICEF? I mean, there are obviously lots of sources. I mean, do you just have to go to each individual organisation and look?
No. Generally, talk to your local university.
Yeah.
Talk to your local authority. Talk to your local enterprise partnership. That's a specific word, local enterprise partnership, LEP. Those are being phased out.
Right.
As part of the funding phase out, as part of everything else, they're being phased out and changed to local authorities. Local authorities as yet don't know too much of this, but they're learning as they go along. Things like UN funding often are directed via your local authority or your LEP or the National Lottery.
Okay. Yeah.
Talk to your local university or talk to UKRI.
Right. So, okay. I mean, if we can find one of you at the local university, then...
But better looking and more helpful, yes.
Yeah, okay. Philip's asked whether we can get a grant for ultra-fast broadband in their area.
Without knowing where Philip's area is, but almost certainly yes, because one of the things that has held the UK back is, A, it's not having the access to broadband. I'm sure you're making fantastic use of broadband here, but also people not knowing what to do with it.
Yeah.
And once you understand some of those productivity solutions, even as a one-man band, even as a one-person business, you can be dealing with 5,000 or 10,000 inquiries a day automatically.
Yeah.
Much more efficiently. And if your conversion rate is 1%, well, it's much better to convert 1% of 5,000 than 1% of 5.
Indeed. Before we move on to any more, let's have a look at your third site, the third resource you were going to show us, which was?
I think we've looked at the important ones. So we've looked at UKRI, we've looked at Innovate UK. I think the third one the only one that we wanted to really look at other than that, and we looked at Contracts Finder.
Right.
So the only other one was the Tell Us What Help You Need, which is how my university works.
Okay.
Which is a fairly straightforward
Okay, well that means that's
slide.
good because that means I can get onto this. Charlotte says, are there any startup grants for a sole trader who will be working from home? I know you said sole traders are difficult, but if I set up as a limited company from the outset, maybe? Well,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There are always grants to help people start up. There are, again, it's a little bit of knowing the landscape. So depending on age, there are always grants from the Prince's Trust to help people of a certain age, sadly more youthful than me. There are grants depending on the particular area.
Yeah.
So if you're based in a rural location, there's often rural location funding.
Right.
They used to be called leader funding for some reason.
Okay.
So there's all sorts of criteria, and it's more a case of talking to someone who knows what they're talking about, who can then say, because of this other thing about you that you weren't even thinking of, that makes you eligible for another piece of funding over there.
Yeah. And Charlotte, I hope I'm not trying to teach Granny to suck eggs, but I can remember when Claire and I set up our first limited company, which was the Ashgrove Health Company. We felt when we were accepted as a company that we'd passed our degree, we'd gone through our final exams. It's dead easy and it doesn't cost very much money. And it does come with some legal obligations, but they're pretty damn simple and you're probably meeting all of them anyway. And if that opens you up to more funding, well, I think it's really well worth considering. And I would defer to somebody who's got more experience with these things than myself, but again, I just think it's...
The big difference between a sole trader and a limited company, the absolute big difference is if something goes wrong, somebody trips over on the way in, smashes their head open, if it's a sole trader, they can take your house. If it's a limited company, the limited company doesn't own your house. So it's whether you're personally liable or whether, cash-wise, it's can they dip their hand in your wallet or only in the company's wallet.
Right. Interesting one here. Sophie wants to know if you can get funding for a receptionist. I suspect there might be, you couldn't do it if you expressed it in quite those terms, but possibly there is a way.
So probably not can I have funding for a receptionist, because that's business as usual. So you're not creating something new. But can you get funding to employ a young person? Almost certainly. Could you hire somebody through a degree apprenticeship post so that it's going to cost you less? Almost certainly. Could that receptionist actually not be a receptionist? Could that receptionist be, you've hired someone or you've funded someone to do a Masters by Research, for example, and part of their role is that they're going to sit at the front door of the office and that's where they're going to be stationed while they work. They may have to deal with reception inquiries while they get there, but that's part of what they were funded to do.
Yeah, okay, so there are ways around that.
It's thinking laterally.
We get lots of sole traders, not surprising. Mick says he's a sole trader with a desire to expand and build a purpose-built clinic on his land. Would there be scope for this? Now we're talking about building a structure, which I think is one of those things which is difficult to fund, isn't it?
It's actually not as difficult as it sounds. Right at the moment, this new programme called Strengthening Places, most of the funding has gone into infrastructure,
right,
which means the local council is using it to build new roundabouts or build new bridges, or that sort of stuff. And those are big projects. Very often they'll have £4 million to do such and such a thing, and they've spent 3.8 million. Another 2 million quid on £200,000 on some sort of infrastructure, there's probably a bit of leftover cash. So it's definitely worth it's definitely worth looking through your local enterprise partnership first and asking what sort of local growth funding they've still got.
Even though this would end up being owned by Mick, they won't care as long as it's local fertility.
Is it creating new jobs? Is it creating? Yeah. Your building is owned by somebody. Every building is owned by somebody.
Yeah, indeed. Good. Pippa says, where would you get funds for grants towards staff training? And I think that's what you've just covered that, really, haven't you? You can't call it staff training to do the receptionist job, but you could make it some sort of research.
Yeah, it depends entirely on the staff training. So if it's specifically around the medical side, then yeah, you're probably looking at going down the road of co-funding Masters by Research, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Because training staff to do their job is business as usual. Yeah. So you shouldn't be getting funding to do that, because that doesn't grow the economy. If you grow the economy, Britain earns more. The more we earn, the more taxes
and sometimes pay. Growing the economy just means adjusting the wording on your form, which leads me to my final question, which is, and it's going to have to be quick, I'm afraid, what sort of things are people going to need to have at hand to put onto an application form for a grant? And I know they all differ, but...
The thing that prevents most people applying for a grant is that they don't want to get 3 quotes. I've decided I want an Apple Mac and I want it from the Apple shop and that is the only quote I'm going to get. Well, you have to think the auditor, the person giving out the money, is going to talk to the auditor and the auditor is going to say, that Apple Mac, is that a reasonable price for an Apple Mac? It's not my job to show that. I just need to show 3 quotes to say, yes, it's a reasonable price.
So you could have 3 quotes for an Apple Mac from different sources? Or?
Yes.
Yes, so it's the same thing.
You can have 3 from different, it's literally having 3 from different sources. You don't have to pick the cheapest.
No.
It's just to show a reasonable understanding. So I could get someone to paint this room. Maybe I could get somebody from India to advise on how to paint this room for £2 and somebody from Northampton for 200 quid. Yes, India's cheaper. Is he really going to be able to do that advice over the phone? No. So there's a reason why you reject the cheapest quote. It's just showing that you went to the effort of showing what's reasonable.
A final question's come in from Mardi. He says, are partnerships considered the same as limited companies? I imagine if it's an LLP, a limited liability partnership, then it would be, yes?
An LLP is fine as a limited company, yes. Yeah, because you've constructed a legal entity.
Gordon, we've had 475 people watching, which is a decent number for a lunchtime show, and I suspect a lot more will be wanting to watch the recording. Just a bit of a reality check for you. I talked about all the money that we got in APM and in my own clinic, thanks to Claire's research in the first place, but also Gordon's efforts on our behalf. We did also put in some bids that didn't succeed, and we put in one bid that didn't succeed, and that didn't succeed because we didn't take advice on how to put the bid in. So there's a bit of a clue in that. It's go and find the people who can help you out with this. And one of the people that you can find now to help you out with this, or one of the groups, is APM. Because if you, as I said at the beginning, if you're an APM member, we will work as hard as we can to help you get your hands on money like this. But you need to help us by telling you what it is you want, and we'll try and find imaginative ways to make sure that you can look for the right sources from the right place and eventually get that money. Anyway.
You can tell us what help you need.
Yes, and I will share the tell us what help you need. And can everybody go to Bedford University regardless of whether they're in Aberdeen or whatever?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Yes. So there we are. We've got another offer of help there from Bedford University. It's been great, Gordon. Thank you very much. I mean, it's lovely of you to come up here. And considering that you've been responsible for getting us all this money and now you're giving up your time as well.
It's nice to see it. It's lovely.
Well, it's nice to see where your money went. Or not your money, but the money you helped us get.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, there you are then. And hopefully that's a useful programme in helping you get your hands on money that can drive your businesses forward. Gordon can't help everybody, obviously, but if you are an APM member, we will do our very best for you, as I've just said. As you know what our role is here, our aim is here at APM. It's to do everything for you so that you can just get on with being a great practitioner. If you're not already a member of APM, and I know there are a few watching today, well, you know what to do. There's a link in the screen, I hope, and if you have any lingering doubts, just give me a call. I'm not a hard sell agent. I'll just explain exactly how you can benefit from being part of this great community that we've set up here.